On this episode of Locked On Lightning, the Bolts have some luck heading into the month of March. Braydon Point stays hot, as well as some upcoming deadline fears. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. But just a reminder that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150. If your bet wins, visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. On this episode, we're talking about some luck of the Irish for the Tampa Bay Lightning as they head into the month of March. We also continue to talk about Braydon Point continuing to stay hot. We talk about that, as well as wrapping things up with some deadline fears. Just a reminder, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Hit that comment section below the video. Hit that thumbs up button so the video could grow, so the algorithm hits it just right, and other people find out about the podcast. So we're talking real quick about the luck of the Irish for the Tampa Bay Lightning heading into the month of March. And the reason I say that is because it has been no secret that this team has not been playing well and has really at times shown that they do not deserve to be in the middle of a playoff race. And yes, it is a playoff race regardless of how far behind certain teams are, or maybe at times, or maybe really even a far gone conclusion it is that this team will make the playoffs. But the reason why I call the Lightning lucky is because when you look at the way this team has played and, you know, just picking up their last 10, they're 5-4-1, coming off a shootout win against the Montreal Canadiens in which, let's face it, they should have won that game in regulation. I don't care what anybody says. I mean, Canadiens, yeah, they got off to a 2-0 lead, but still, the Lightning, as we all know by now, there are games that they should win, and there are games that they should most definitely win. And this was a game that I thought they should most definitely win. They did, but not in the way that we would have liked them to. So the reason why I call them lucky is because even though the Lightning have not been playing well or up to our standards over their last 10, you look at the teams behind them in the wild card race: the Islanders, the Capitals, the Devils, the Penguins. And for lack of a better way to say it, they have completely let the Lightning off the hook. And that's a fact. I mean, the way that these teams have played and the amount of opportunities, the amount of games, really, if you look at the Islanders, because they're the closest team to the Lightning in the standings, the amount of games that the Islanders have blown, that I've seen them blown personally because I live up in New York, so I get a lot of Islander games, and I just happen to throw the games on. They've looked a lot better since Patrick Waugh entered into the equation, but not to where they could, I think, realistically catch the Lightning. Now that could all change in a matter of 2 weeks. We all know that how hockey works and how crazy the standings could flip back and forth. But a team that really, really has shocked me this year has been the New Jersey Devils. I think at one point they were in the top 3 in the Metropolitan Division, and now they just fired their coach in Lindy Ruff, and now, and I know some people will say, well, Jack Hughes was out for a while. I don't care. I mean, and it's not just the players, it's the front office, because if you've been following the NHL closely over the last, let's say, 3 years, they've had a very good team. Very good potential to do very good things in the Eastern Conference. And not only have the Devils let the Lightning off the hook in terms of this playoff run, but I would even go a step further as to say that the Devils have let off the rest of the Eastern Conference, because I have a Devils friend of mine, and shout out to Brian in Poland if you're listening to this. I have always told him that this Devils team, and I know some of you might be saying, Adam, this is a Lightning podcast. What the hell are you doing? I'm going to get to it. Don't worry. So I've always told him the one thing, because you don't have to worry about this whole team, because this team, the way it's built, they're fine. They're going to be successful. But at the end of the day, the problem that has been for this Devils team over the last 3-4 years has been goaltending. And you have not seen an uptick. I mean, really what the no-brainer decision should have been for the Devils over the last couple of weeks, and it came out tonight from Frank Cervelli that potential trades, it looks like, were blocked for Jacob Markstrom, but that should have been a deal that you should have tried to get done as soon as possible. Bring him in, let him get comfortable, or even maybe Marc-Andre Fleury. But they haven't done that, and it doesn't matter how much talent you have on your team if your goaltender isn't sturdy. As we all know, it becomes null and void at that point. But really, this marks a very important stretch for the Lightning now, because March, as we have spoken about over the last, this podcast has been around for 4 years now, 5 seasons. We always look at the month of March as a month to get into, or start to get into, the playoff mentality. And I've always looked at March in the NHL season as really a time to identify what are your strengths, if you haven't already, what are your weaknesses, what's going to work for you long term, what is something that you should just kick to the side and say, listen, we tried this for a while and it's not working for us. It's not something that's going to be successful for us if we get into the playoffs. So I think really at the end of the day, I think that this is really a month in which the Lightning need to be completely honest with themselves and use the games that they have coming up as kind of a last minute tryout period for certain things. Now, this is all based on the idea that the Lightning continue in a somewhat upward trajectory in this, or a consistent effort in the standings, to where they do end up getting one of those wild card spots. But they have plenty of opportunities to figure out the trial and error that will be coming up. They got the Flames next week. Actually, the Flames on Thursday. Excuse me. A potential first look at Noah Hannafin in terms of last time in a Flames uniform, and maybe they could tell him, hey, just don't go anywhere once this game's over because you're going to stay in Tampa. And then you got the Flyers, and then you have another long week off, which is wild. I mean, I'm not a big fan of this. And you're at home against the Rangers, you're playing the Panthers, and then you're on the road for a 4-game stretch on the West Coast against the Knights and the Sharks, Kings, and Ducks. And then you're back home against the Bruins and the Islanders. So a lot of games that can show you what you're made of, but as well as games like the Islanders game, like potentially the Flyers where they are at that point, but that have or could have wild card standings implications. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that, how you're feeling about the Lightning thus far. Have the Lightning been let off the hook, or like we often see at times in the standings in the NHL, things could switch on a dime, and we could be here next week talking about how the Lightning are out of the playoff picture. But you could catch all the news here on Locked On Lightning, of course. So go ahead and make sure to subscribe. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about, or continue our season talk about, the miracle that is Braydon Point. We'll talk about how he is just continuing to prove how he is such a big part of this team and why he continues not to get any credit for it, at least nationwide. So coming up, we'll do that. But first, let's talk about our first sponsors on today's show, and that is our friends over at FanDuel. Now, in case you haven't heard, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. That's why right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Now, you could bet on all your favorite NBA, NHL games right now with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So as always, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. You can subscribe to our channel there. Please go ahead. It helps us grow. It helps us reach more people, as well as you could, if you want to get in and continue the conversation that we have in live time, go ahead to our Discord server. I'll drop the link to the server in the captions when this video is posted. So we just got talking about, the Lightning have had some luck, let's say, going into the month of March. They've been playing, I would say they've been treading water. I think that's a good way to put it. I think that, though, this team could be so much better. But I will say that, though, I'm not going to take away credit from when they have played well. And a large part of that, the reason why they have played well, is because not only of, Nikita Kucherov, who really, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care where the Lightning finish in the season. I think some other people do. But I think at the end of the day, it's not just the Nikita Kucherov show, which is good to see because I kind of felt like it was like that for a couple of months. But now it's kind of like Nikita Kucherov plus Brandon Hagel and Braydon Point. And Braydon Point is been that guy on this team that I still firmly believe, even at this point in his career, where I think we could all agree if you're not a Lightning fan, but you are a fan of hockey and you've watched the NHL playoffs every year since 2020, you sure as hell know who Braydon Point is. He has just been wreaking havoc in the playoffs, but more so, he has really been putting up the numbers, especially over the last couple of years, in which he has gone from supporting cast player to, I really think, borderline, and this might be a little blasphemous for some people, but I think borderline elite scorer. I mean, you look at his game, and if you want to look at the stats from this year, and this is all coming off after a 51 goal season with a shade under 100 points, where he might be able to get back to that. I don't know about the points, but he could very well get back to 50. I will say, I think when you look at his game and what makes him so good, and I think that's why some NHL fans look at him and he doesn't pass the eye test for them. I think part of it has to do is that he just is so good on a lot down the middle of the ice, but because that's really where his game is, that's where he's situated. But he's so unassuming, and his numbers are so even. When you look at the assists, you look at goals, and then you watch him in a game, and he's just kind of, floating around, kind of taking control of the slot. He picks his moments. He's not an aggressive guy when it comes to scoring. He doesn't pop out to you. That's really what I'm trying to say. He's not a McDavid, he's not a McKinnon, he's not a Kucherov, but that's because the Lightning don't necessarily need him to be. And he wasn't like that last year. He was just able to pick his moments, and I think that is why, well, at least part of the reason of what makes him so good as a player. And I think eventually when him and Kuch aren't exactly that far apart in age. Kucherov, I think, maybe has 1 or 2 years on him. But maybe at some point we'll see their little bit passing of the torch. I don't know. I mean, like I said, they're not that far apart in age where you're really going to see that from Point and Kucherov. But I think that I will say this is that I think, a lot of people, the reason why he doesn't get his clout, and that's fine, is because they use Kucherov as kind of a crutch for him. And I will say this is that I don't firmly believe that, that is an untrue thing to assume. But when you look at especially his last 10 games, okay, 7 goals, 4 assists in a shade under 20 minutes of ice time, he is absolutely electric. He is absolutely spearheading the offense for this Tampa Bay Lightning team. And I am absolutely positive that if he wasn't playing at this level, I don't think the Lightning would necessarily be where they are. And that could go for Brandon Hagel. That could go for Nikita Kucherov. That definitely, maybe a 50-50 statement with Nick Paul. I think maybe they wouldn't be as close to a playoff. Maybe they wouldn't be as separated from the other teams behind them. But I think, as if you've been a listener of this show for quite some time, you know that I always say that Nikita Kucherov is really the foot that pedals the bike of this Lightning offense. But I will say that I think Braydon Point can confidently be added to that conversation now in terms of being the spark that lights the fire for this team, and I think that we're seeing an evolution of a player in front of our eyes where, last year he kind of took that leap, 50 goals, 95 points. This year he's having a 32-32 season, could possibly finish with 50 goals again. Next year, if the trajectory is staying at where it is, he could potentially be a 50 goal, 100-point guy on a yearly basis. And I don't know about you, but that you continue doing that for a couple of years, you're landing yourself in the Hall of Fame. A lot of people might think, I heard a commentator say once that Braydon Point was a future Hall of Famer, which I hope they were saying that of potential and not of his current numbers. But the future is looking bright for the Lightning, regardless of how you feel about this team, because Braydon Point is proving to you every day on the ice, regardless of how this team plays and the lack there of assets that they may have in Syracuse. The future of the Tampa Bay Lightning, Stamkos aside, Hedman aside, they're in good hands with 86-21. So let me know in the comments below how you're feeling about that. Just, a very good positive, I think. I will say I've not focused a whole ton on the positives with this team, rightfully so, but, sometimes you got to take a step back and realize, where this team could possibly be going, what they have while they're going in that direction, and that is 3 very good offensive weapons on their first line. So coming up in just a little bit, I'm going to list off my deadline fears with the upcoming deadline coming up on Friday. We'll break that all down. Coming up in just a little bit, but first I want to talk about our last sponsor of the day, and is our friends over at the Game Time app. Now, you shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. with killer last-minute deals, all on prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They got all these great things, all these great features, last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Views from your seat in the venue, lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, etc., etc. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets from Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so go ahead and subscribe to the podcast there. Hit us up on our Discord server. We're on Reddit. We're everywhere. If you want to reach out to me directly and you don't want to do it in the comments, go ahead and reach out to me on X at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. I love hearing from all of you. I really do. And it's a very important part of the season. It's a very stressful part of the season. I will say that a part of the season where I think we could all agree that the Lightning are almost in unfamiliar territory, given the fact that they have had so much success over the course of the last 5 seasons. And they're kind of like in their underdog chapter. I think we could call it that, given just, they're in the second last wild card spot. Things aren't exactly going swimmingly. And there's a lot of questions going into this deadline, and we just got done last week talking about why it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for this team to sell. Now, having said that, if you missed that episode, go ahead and go back and listen to it. It was, I kind of have been touching upon it on every episode, but I stated very clearly that it was very important that the Lightning didn't full out sell. And what that means is, you don't really see that often, but if a hypothetical full out sell would be trading Stamkos, possibly trading Hedman, getting rid of maybe Chernak, stuff like that. But I think that the Lightning are in that sweet spot, regardless of where we actually truthfully feel like where this team is going, that they could kind of hedge their bets. They could sell and buy at the same time. And I've given out that format as to how they could do it successfully. Now, having said that, my main trade deadline fear is that this team going, and this is kind of what sucks about the schedule right now. The Lightning don't play till Thursday. If they played maybe 3 games this week, that's a little different. You could kind of, build up the anticipation. I would say more so get a better sense of where this team is starting to trend, because really after the deadline, that's it. You can't really do much of anything else after that, obviously, until the summer. But unfortunately, they only play 1 game before the deadline this week. And I'm afraid, and I'm sure some people feel that way, I am very deathly afraid that this team is going to do absolutely nothing at the deadline. And what I mean by that, because I did tweet this out the other day, that I feel when I say that they will make a move. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that would be an absolute nightmare if they did not. And Julian Breeze-Boss would have to 100% answer for that, whether it be to Jeff Vinnick or, the fan base or both or whatever the case may be. I think they will make moves in that case. If they do, when I say nothing, I mean they don't do anything of substance that immediately affects this team or in the future. I think it would more so be like little housekeeping things like trading Connor Sheary, swapping draft picks with another team, little weird stuff like that really has no bearing on the season. And I think that's a real fear. I think that's a fear that could potentially happen. I think that Julian Brees-Boss, as I hate to use recency bias as a reason, but you look at last year, the guy buckled under pressure. And that goes into my next fear for the trade deadline, is that he waits till the last minute. We're sitting here, and off the top of my head, I don't know when the deadline actually ends during the day, what time. But I will say my fear, and I think this is also another legitimate one, is that he waits till the absolute last minute and he gets Hannafin or whomever, or even if he has to settle for, I don't know, someone that we haven't even spoken about. And he once again gives up a first, a second, whatever the case may be, Sheary, Boulay, whoever the case may be. And we're sitting here looking at each other like, WTF, what's going on? And I think that's a legitimate fear. It's kind of like a prove me wrong scenario when you're talking about that with Julian Brees-Boss. I think that's another thing. That's why I think along with a lot of Lightning fans, would have been a little bit more comfortable if a deal was made last week. And on the other side of that coin, since the Lightning are indeed coming off a win and have a good chance of winning on Thursday, unless they completely mess that up because Calgary is atrocious, I could see them swinging the complete other way. I could see them thinking, for whatever reason, whether it comes from JBB's misled thoughts or maybe from up top with Jeff Vinnick saying, I still think we could win. I could see them completely thinking that they have a chance to make a run. They make a big trade. They trade a lot of assets. And then they get bounced in the first round. I think that's also another fully possible scenario, because I think that maybe Brees-Boss thinks, well, Stammer could very well leave after this year. Hedman's not getting any older. We're going to have to next year might have to be used as kind of a very, very short-term rebuild year. And they go all in. They think that, all right, Vazzy's going to hit his stride in March and then April into May. And it's all going to click. All we got to do is do what we did a couple of years ago with Coleman, Goodrow, and then, Paul. And no, absolutely not. That would probably be worse than not doing anything at the deadline at all. So a lot of fears going into Thursday. The sooner the better, honestly, I think we could say is, and that will be the mantra, I think, throughout the course of the week as we edge ever closer to the trade deadline on Friday. So stay tuned to our social media pages, LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as Locked_Lightning on Instagram. If anything breaks at a good time, if we're able to get something out as soon as possible, I mean, we will be dropping a reaction video at some point. So stay tuned for that, because that is something you definitely won't want to miss, especially if it's something that is bad. So We'll be back tomorrow to talk more trade deadline possibilities. We'll look at some other players on this team. I think at some point we're going to have to do an entire segment on Connor Sherry because I really want to know what went wrong. But the best way I've been able to really describe his season has been Vlad Domestikov 2.0. But regardless of what we talk about, you could always find us here on Locked On Lightning on our social media pages, on our YouTube channel. So subscribe to that as well. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.